Chapter 5. The Library's Ghosts. In spite of their busy life at school, Hoggie and Scooter made a lot of progress in their search for the mirror in the following month. One gloomy, rainy afternoon, the friends were, as usual, digging through stacks of books, when Scooter, who had just replaced a particularly heavy tome back on the top shelf, said,
"That's it. That was the last of them." "It can't be." "See for yourself." Scooter pointed at the row of books. "We're at the end of the last aisle. There are no more books to check." Hoggie looked around. In the last few weeks they had gone through every bookshelf in the library, slowly making their way to the building's top 5th floor. They were now at the very end of the foreign languages room, at its farthest bookcase. Beyond it, there was nothing but a brick wall. "It can't be," Hoggie repeated. "We haven't found the mirror yet." "Well," Scooter replied, climbing down the ladder, "I can think of many reasons why it's happened. Maybe we have missed the book, or maybe the book was not in the library to begin with." Hoggie was disappointed, not only because, without the mirror, they would not be paid the £2,000, but also because in the many days they had spent looking for the book, she had grown quite curious about it. Tired, the friends sat on the window-sill at the end of the room. Was it possible that Dr. Barnaby was wrong about the mirror being hidden in the library? Hoggie was thinking. Or did they really overlook the unremarkable brown book without a catalogue number on its spine? Hoggie's thoughts were interrupted by a soft jingling. It was as if someone was throwing pebbles into an aluminium bucket. Hoggie looked around. The reading-room in which she and Scooter were seated was nearly empty. Just 2 or 3 people here and there, engrossed in their books and magazines. In the corner of the room, the librarian on duty was helping someone to find a book. She took the patron's query form, folded it, and stuck it in a small plastic capsule. And then she pushed the capsule through a little opening in a steel pipe attached to the wall, and running all the way down to the basement. As the capsule fell down the pipe, it made a jingling sound. "Of course!" Hoggie exclaimed. "How could we forget?" "What is it?" Hoggie turned to Scooter and whispered excitedly, "There are more books to check, Scooter. There are more books in the stores." Scooter gasped. Indeed, how could they forget? Spacious and numerous as the library's reading rooms were, they could not fit its entire collection. Some of the books were so old and on such obscure subjects, people did not read them very often. These books were kept in a special room in the library's basement, the stores. "But how are we going to get there?" Scooter asked. It was a very good question, because only people who worked for the library could enter the special room in the basement. "We'll figure it out." And so, for the next 3 days, the young adventurers explored ways of getting into the stores. There was a set of stairs going to the basement, as well as a service elevator, but to use either of these, one needed a special electronic key. There were also windows just above the ground level, through which a very small person could crawl, but all of them were barred. The friends were running out of ideas as to how they could possibly sneak into the stores, when something unexpected and something very fortunate happened. One afternoon, Hoggie was waiting for Scooter outside the bathrooms. The bathrooms were in a little nook at the top of the stairs that led to the 2nd floor. In the nook, there was just enough room for a bench and 2 doors. One of the doors led to the bathrooms, another to someone's office. Hoggie was sitting on the bench, reading the Mesopotamian myths, when suddenly the office door opened, and a young woman appeared from behind it. The young woman was walking backwards, because she was carrying a large box filled to the top with books. "Bye," she said to someone inside the office. "I see you next month." The woman smiled at Hoggie and started down the stairs. Hoggie was about to resume her reading, when she noticed something on the floor in front of her. She picked it up. It was a ribbon. Attached to the ribbon were an identification card in the name of Laurie Geiger,
and an electronic key. The young librarian must have dropped them as she was manoeuvring her box through the office door. Hoggy moved to follow Laurie down the stairs and give her back the card, when suddenly she had an idea. She cast a quick glance around to make sure that nobody had seen her, and then slid the card and the key into her pocket. As soon as Scooter came out of the bathroom, Hoggy dragged him out of the nook, lest the people in Laurie's office overheard them, and then showed him the key.
"Where did you get that?"
Scooter sounded both excited and worried. Hoggy told him.
"We can go anywhere in the library now," she said in the end. "I can't believe you stole that woman's key." "I did not steal it," Hoggy hissed. "I found it, and I'm going to give it back to her as soon as we've finished searching the basement."
Scooter stared at his friend with disapproval.
"Oh, come on," Hoggy pleaded. "Laurie will not need her key for the next month anyway, and it may be our only chance."
Scooter was hesitant.
"We don't even know if the key opens the basement." "Well, there's only one way to find out."
Hoggy pranced down the stairs to the first floor's lobby, where, behind Charles Dickens's bust, there was a door to the basement. Scooter followed her slowly, expecting to be caught any moment. There was a little box attached to the basement door, and in the box, burning bright in the dark nook behind the bust, was a tiny red light. Hoggy took out Laurie's electronic key, and pressed it against the box. Immediately something clicked inside the box, and the light changed from red to green. Hoggy pushed down the handle, and the door opened. All the basements Hoggy had seen before were cold, dusky, and muggy, with mould on the walls and a clutter of unwanted things on the floors. The library's basement, however, wasn't like that at all. It was dry and well lit, and there was nothing but books here, thousands of books, stacked on tall steel bookcases that were bolted to the concrete floor in neat, evenly spaced rows.
"Look at all these books!"
Scooter exclaimed, with a mix of wonder and terror, as he realized how many hours they would have to spend in the basement looking for the mirror. The same thought must have occurred to Hoggy, because she immediately rolled up the sleeves of her jumper and said,
"Let's get to work."
The friends began their search at once, but had to abandon it just as quickly, because library employees kept coming to the basement. What made things even more inconvenient was that there was absolutely nowhere to hide in the bare atmosphere of the stores.
"This isn't working,"
Hoggy declared finally.
"We have to come back here when the library is closed." "But the library is open every day," Scooter objected, "except on holidays, and the next holiday is months away." "It's closed at night," Hoggy said pensively.
Scooter did not like the sound of this.
"We can't come here at night." "Why not? It would be a perfect time. No interruptions. We could go through the whole place in a couple of hours."
"But how are we going to get into the library after closure?"
"We won't. We'll come here during the day and stay behind at closing time."
"And what if we're caught?"
"We'll just say that we were locked in by accident."
"But won't someone notice that we're missing?"
"You can tell your dad that you're staying at my place,"
Hoggy suggested.
"You'll just take your cell phone with you in case he calls to check on you."
"And what about your aunt?"
"We can come here on a night she works at the movie theatre. She doesn't get home until 3 in the morning on those nights."
Scooter reflected on his friend's proposal. As much as he hated to admit it, Hoggy was right. There could be no better time for them to explore the stores than in the dead of night. "All right," he said at last. Hoggy feared that Laurie might notice the loss of her key, and have the library's security change the combination of the electronic lock. Obviously, a trip to the basement had to be done as soon as possible. Still, the friends wished to be prepared for their daring act, and so they spent the next 2 days looking for loopholes in the library's security system, and studying its employees' routine. At last, Hoggy announced,
"We are going in tomorrow."
The next evening, Hoggy made dinner for herself and Aunt Michelle, and left her aunt's share on the kitchen table. She then rolled up a couple of old coats, stuck them in her bed, and pulled the blanket over them. Finally, she took her backpack and went to the library. Scooter was already there. He was sitting in the arts section on the top floor, seemingly engrossed in a magazine. Hoggie sat next to him and noted,
"Your magazine is upside down."
Scooter cursed, and put the magazine away. Just then the librarian on duty announced that the library would be closing in 10 minutes. Most of the people in the reading-room rose and headed for the exit. Hoggie and Scooter also got up and left the room. Once they were in the 5th-floor foyer, however, they did not go down the stairs like everyone else. Instead, they rushed towards the foyer's western wall, where, in a dark nook, there was a door bearing a sign, "Fire Exit." The door opened to a narrow stone stairwell that wound all the way down to the 1st floor. At the top of the stairwell was an iron ladder, leading to the attic. Upon reaching the door at the top of the iron ladder, the friends encountered an unexpected obstacle.
"It's locked,"
Scooter exclaimed, examining the large padlock that secured access to the attic. But Hoggie wasn't at all bothered by this new problem.
"Hey,"
she said,
"I've wanted to do this for weeks."
She pulled a hairpin out of her hair and inserted it in the padlock's keyhole.
"Now, how did he do it?"
she muttered, recalling and repeating what Prospero had taught her. The next moment, with a loud clank, the padlock opened. Scooter looked at his friend with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment.
"Do you have any more supernatural powers I don't know about?"
he asked.
"I have a few,"
Hoggie said, grinning. Once inside, the children dropped their backpacks on the floor and prepared for a long wait. Hoggie spent the last 2 evenings watching the security guards make their rounds, and could now picture exactly where they were and what they were doing. By now, nearly all of the library's late visitors would have been ushered out of the building. One of the security guards would be scurrying through the reading rooms, straightening the chairs and picking up abandoned umbrellas. At the same time, another security guard would be checking the bathroom stalls and fire exits. Scooter rummaged in his pocket. In the attic's darkness, Hoggie could not see what her friend was doing, but she was certain that he was pulling out a hanky and wiping his glasses.
"He'll be here any minute,"
Hoggie whispered, and just as she did, the door at the foot of the ladder opened, and someone inquired, "Anyone here?" The keys on his belt jingling, the security guard stomped down the stairwell. A couple of minutes later, the door rumbled again, announcing his departure. Scooter exhaled softly. Hoggie waited a few more seconds to make sure that the security guard was indeed gone, and then turned on her flashlight.
"It's 8:20,
she announced, upon consulting her watch.
"Let's wait here for another 20 minutes, just in case."
Scooter nodded his agreement, and wearily sank down on the floor. Hoggie shone the light around the attic. Though spacious and high-ceilinged, it was crowded with boxes and crates, buckets of paint well past their expiration date, a few pieces of rickety old furniture which no one had the heart to throw away, out-of-date maps, and faded pictures in ugly frames. Through all this clutter, a narrow path cut straight to the attic's opposite wall. At the end of that path there was a door to the roof.
"I bet that's the only reason anyone ever comes here,"
Hoggie muttered, examining the dust on the boxes, and the old cobwebs hanging down from the roof beams. She then sat down next to Scooter, and pictured the security guards turning on the alarm and locking the main entrance. At 20 to 9 exactly, the children opened the attic's door and peeped out. The stairwell was dim and deserted. Very quietly, they stepped out into the foyer. The library was completely dark now, except for the light of a single lamp in the 1st-floor lobby, that shone far at the bottom of the stairwell like a beacon at sea. Scooter did not know, until that very moment, how much he was afraid of the dark. It was one thing walking through a dark apartment to fetch a glass of water from the kitchen, wandering around a night-covered library was a different and by far more frightening matter. In the dark, all the rooms seemed as big and deep as mountain caves, and all the objects took on menacing shapes. The story of the ghostly librarian came to Scooter's mind. Suddenly, it no longer seemed as unlikely as it did in the light of day. But just then, Hoggie's fingers grabbed Scooter's hand, and her voice said reassuringly,
"Let's go find that mirror, Scooter."
Silently, the friends descended down the stairs. The library was, indeed, abandoned. Only one of the security guards stayed behind. The children could see him seated at the reception desk near the entrance. Shielded from the lobby by a glass door, the guard was reading by the light of a table lamp, the very light that guided them down the stairs. Very slowly, their eyes on the guard, the children tiptoed to the niche behind Charles Dickens's bust. As the electronic lock beeped softly, the guard raised his eyes off the book. For a few moments he sat still, listening to the eerie silence. In the end, the man decided that he had imagined the sound, and went back to reading his book. It was at this moment that Hoggie and Scooter sneaked into the basement. Now that nobody was interrupting them, their search went a lot faster. By the time they decided to take a break for tea and sandwiches, they had gone through half the stores. Still, they had not seen anything resembling, even remotely, the mirror.
"I hope this confounded book is here somewhere,"
Scooter whispered. Even though Hoggie assured him that the basement was completely soundproof, he could not stop worrying about being overheard by the security guard.
"Because I'm not committing a burglary for nothing." "Will you stop worrying?"
Hoggie said.
"We still have thousands of books to go through."
For a few moments they ate their sandwiches in silence. It was then that Hoggie suddenly heard a faint sound.
"Do you hear that?"
she asked.
"I'm sorry."
Scooter blushed.
"My stomach always does that when I'm nervous."
Hoggie shook her head.
"No, it's something else."
She rose and walked slowly down the passage between the bookcases. As she approached the northern wall, the sound grew louder. One moment it sounded as if someone was picking a big chunk of ice, and the next moment it was like a dog clawing at a door. Hoggie pressed her ear against the stone. The sounds were definitely coming from behind the wall.
"What do you think it is?"
she asked Scooter, who had also laid aside his sandwich, and followed her to the end of the passage.
"The tube?"
Hoggie shook her head again.
"That isn't what the tube sounds like."
Just then a set of steel wheels rolled by, somewhere in the distance.
"Now that was the tube."
Scooter shrugged.
"I don't know, then." "What if it's a ghost?"
Hoggie asked in a softer voice. Now that they were in a well-lit room again, Scooter's rational, scientific self was back.
"There's no such thing as ghosts, Hoggie,"
he said authoritatively. And before Hoggie had a chance to mention Colin and his apparition, he added,
"I have looked up our library's first librarian. It wasn't even a man. It was a woman, and she died peacefully of old age. It can be some other ghost."
Hoggie did not give up.
"A beheaded duke, or a builder accidentally sealed in the library's wall, or—"
Her eyes twinkled excitedly as another thought occurred to her.
"A Roman soldier trapped in one of them underground tunnels, the catacombs. I've read somewhere that there is a great maze of them under the entire city of London."
But Scooter only shrugged once again.
"Or it can be a water pipe, or a rat."
His explanations, however, did not fully convince Hoggie, and for the next few hours she would cast a suspicious glance towards the wall every time a scratching sound came from behind it. It was 3 a.m. when the children reached the end of the row of bookcases. By then they had gone through tens of thousands of books, but unfortunately the mirror wasn't among them.
"All the effort,"
Scooter grumbled,
"and nothing to show for it."
Hoggie was more optimistic, however.
"I wouldn't say so. We now know, for sure, that the book isn't in the basement, which means that we don't have to come here again, and can concentrate on other rooms. But there are no other rooms.
Hoggy thought for a moment.
What about the staff offices? They wouldn't keep any books there. Have you been there?
No.
Then how do you know?
The staff offices, located on the 3rd floor, were not locked, fortunately for the children. Unfortunately, they, just as Scooter had guessed, contained very few books, and none that matched the mirror's description. The same disappointment awaited them on the 2nd floor, whose out-of-bounds area was nothing more than a copy-room and a storage-room, filled with reams of paper and boxes of pencils.
"Well, that was useless,"
Hoggy grunted, her optimism diminished noticeably. She opened, for a 5th or 6th time, a large filing cabinet, made sure that it contained nothing but old inventory records, and slammed it shut in frustration.
"What are we going to do now?"
Scooter asked. Hoggy looked at her watch. It was 4:30. The library would remain closed for another 5 hours.
"I guess we can go back to the attic and get some sleep,"
she said, finally admitting her defeat. They were divining their way back through the dark science section, when Scooter stopped suddenly, and clutched his friend's hand. Hoggy was just about to ask him what the matter was, when she saw it with her own eyes. Beams of the street-lights fell through the window-panes onto the floor and walls of the reading-room, cleaving it into strips of light and darkness. Moving across the floor, from the obscurity into the light, and back into the obscurity, was the solitary figure of a man.
"The guard,"
was Hoggy's first thought. Swiftly she stepped behind the nearby bookcase, pulling Scooter along. But as the two of them watched the man from their hiding-place, the girl began to wonder if this was indeed the night guard. First of all, she could not understand why the guard would make his rounds in the dark. He could have turned on the light, or at least used a flashlight. Another thing that was odd about the man was the very careful, very stealthy way in which he moved about. The children could not even make out his footsteps. It was as if he were trying not to be heard. And why would a man, who, unlike the children, had every right to be in the library after hours, wish to do so? Just then, the man reached the reading-room's western wall, and then he was gone. Hoggy thought at first that the man had simply stepped into a blind spot, and for a few moments she waited for him to reappear. But he never did. So intrigued were the children by this strange event, that they dared to come out of their hiding-place and tiptoe across the room towards the very place from which the man had vanished.
"Where did he go?"
Scooter said in bewilderment, moving his flashlight up and down the wall.
"I don't know."
Hoggy was equally confused.
"The only way out of the room is back. But if he went that way, we would have seen him. This is so odd."
Scooter even looked under one of the nearby reading desks.
"One moment he was right here, and next moment he was gone."
The boy gasped, as he suddenly realized that these were the exact words Colin used to describe his encounter with the ghost of the librarian. Hoggy recognized those words too.
"What do you think of my unscientific theory now?"
she wanted to say. But then she noticed how scared Scooter was, and decided not to.
"Let's just go back to the attic," she said instead. "It's nearly morning."
In the attic, the friends made themselves a nest of sorts, out of some old rags, and settled down in it. It was eerily quiet.
"Even Aunt Michelle must be home by now,"
Hoggy noted.
"Your dad must be back too."
Scooter shook his head.
"He's in the middle of a big trial. He's probably fallen asleep on a sofa in his office, while reading police reports." "That's rough."
Scooter shrugged.
"He's used to it."
Hoggy had meant Scooter, not his father, but she did not put him right.
"Do you ever miss having both parents?"
she asked, after a few silent moments.
"I mean, having them in the same house?"
Scooter shook his head again.
"No. They used to fight a lot. They are much happier now that they are divorced." and I'm happier because they're happier."
Hoggy could understand that.
"How is your aunt?"
Scooter asked, taking a big roll of posters and sticking it under his head as a pillow.
"She's getting better. I think this new boyfriend of hers really is good for her."
"Aunt Michelle has a new boyfriend?"
Hoggy nodded. "How is he?" "He's all right. Much nicer than all those losers she used to date. I'm just afraid that when he finally breaks up with her, it'll be really hard on her."
"You think he'll break up with her?"
"Sure he will,"
Hoggy said with a sigh.
"They all do. I just hope that my mum is back by then, so I don't have to deal with it alone."
"Your mum is coming back? Have you heard from her?"
"Sort of."
And so Hoggy told Scooter about her mother's letter.
"By the way," she asked, "do you know what HMP means?"
Scooter hesitated for a moment. "No," he then replied, suddenly very interested in a stain on the attic's ceiling.
"Oh, well,"
Hoggy yawned.
"it probably doesn't matter anyway."
Exhausted by their search, Scooter was asleep just minutes later. Hoggy, on the other hand, could not sleep. For a while she studied the library's floor plan, and then rose and walked around a bit, so as to stretch her legs. In one spot, the wooden board under her foot squeaked and trembled. Hoggy kneeled and shone the flashlight onto the floor. The board was loose, and when Hoggy removed it, she found stashed underneath the attic's floor a large paper envelope. Hoggy had heard stories of construction workers sometimes finding small treasures buried in the walls and floors of old houses.
"I hope it's money,"
she muttered, opening the envelope,
"although jewels would be good too."
But, to her disappointment, the envelope contained neither. All that was inside it was a lot of photographs, all frayed and yellowed with age. Most of the photographs were portraits. A few, however, were of houses and parks, an old streetcar, and a railway station. There was among them even one very odd photograph that had captured a large ship sitting atop a pile of rubble that had been formerly number 221 on Fountain Street. Hundreds of dead fish were scattered on the streets and front lawns of the neighbouring houses, and bemused onlookers crowded around.
1910. Hurricane East Ender. The Rosamunda finds an unlikely anchorage on Fountain Street.
Hoggy read on the back of the photograph. In the end, Hoggy put her find back under the floorboards. By then it was nearly morning, although the attic, which had no windows, was as dark as ever. Scooter, curled in a tiny ball on the floor, was snoring softly. Hoggy covered him with her coat, sat down next to him, and turned off her now dim flashlight. She sat awake in the dark for the remaining hour of the night, recalling every moment of their quest, every tome she had looked at in the past week, and wondering where the mirror was, and how they could have missed it.